Easter, right? There's
Yeah, it came through yesterday and knocked out people's power. We got our first snow of the season, and yes, it was all quite exciting.
welcome to winter.
Exactly.
Hello, Syed. Kailash Joshi. I think you are muted.
Yes,
Professor
hello.
Fareed,
Hi,
welcome.
this is Fareed.
Hi, Farid. Syed, how are you, sir?
Very good. How are you?
Wonderful, wonderful. Yes, good to see you,
You too.
virtually.
Thank
so
you.
happy you were able to make it to this forum. We are very appreciative.
I appreciate it. Thank you for the invitation.
We have Reverend, I think you will be introduced by Mukunji,
Oh, great.
and soon we'll get started.
I will do a quick test so that I want to make sure that I can share my screen with all of you.
Okay.
So give me just a quick second. Share screen. Oh, host disabled participant screen sharing.
I think Gauravji may need to make you the host.
Yeah, I thought he had given all the FAs the host key.
I have the same issue.
Yeah, I had the same issue as well.
All right. Okay. So I'm gonna call him right away.
He was on this call.
He's
just
on
a few
the
minutes
call.
ago. He's here.
Call. Oh, then that should be straightforward.
Okay, he has fixed the problem. So
That's pretty fast. That's good.
yeah. So one of you, Kailashi, you can see the screen?
I can.
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. So I'll stop sharing and we'll start in maybe give 2-3 minutes.
So Ashishji, in turn, you will have to enable me and the other panelists to share our screens as well.
Yeah, okay. I think, yeah, we'll figure out a way for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, currently it's disabled for us.
Okay, we'll get that. We have people here, and we also have people on the YouTube link. So there is going to be some our family and friends attendance there.
Namaskar ji. I'm Jessie. I was wondering if you will share the PowerPoint from your end, or do you want me to do it?
Jessie Ji, either way, if you would prefer us to do it, we can.
Okay.
If you would prefer to do it when we get to your turn, we will just let you share your screen and do it.
Okay. All right. I'll take it. Sounds good.
Wonderful. Thanks.
And namaste and welcome, Jessie.
Namaste also from here, Kailash.
Thank you so much, and wonderful to be here.
Wonderful to have you join us. Thank you. Farid, your classes are going virtual. Are you able to conduct some in class also?
No, our entire campus is closed, so everything is virtual.
Wow.
We had considered having in-person classes, but the faculty thought it was too risky, and the university then made a decision. In fact, we're doing the same in the winter term and possibly even in the spring term. So it may be the entire year.
Yeah, some universities I heard have announced no in-class for the entire academic year now.
Yes.
So
Yeah, I suspect it's going to be next fall before things get back to
That's right.
a semblance of normalcy.
Yeah, University of Michigan, which had opened up, had 2,500 cases of COVID, and so they immediately by October closed it all up.
Yeah, it's happening rapidly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's too bad. The whole thing has gotten so disrupted.
Oh, absolutely.
I thought California had acted well, but I guess it was not sufficient for the second wave to be so brutal again.
Yeah, it's much worse than anyone
Yeah.
anticipated. I remember Dr. Fauci had said if we get to 100,000 per day, that would be really, really bad. And now we're over 200,000 per day, which is
Yeah.
just an incredibly high number.
And the fatalities are the more scary part. I mean, 3,000
Yeah,
numbers that you could not imagine.
could not imagine. Yeah.
Quite-
I mean, this vaccine is coming, but I heard just this morning that they expect maybe by March where a sizable number of people would start to get it, but it'd still be another 4 months before we get it.
Yeah.
At the earliest, it's going to be a monumental logistical issue.
Yes.
Yeah, this whole temperature management is apparently not trivial. To get it to the right people with the right temperature, delivery, and all the way to the point of injection.
That's right.
Yeah. So, Ashishji, would you like to, Mukherjee, what is your thought? Should we get started or give 2 more minutes?
Well, it's 2 minutes past 1. Perhaps we should, all our panelists are here and people watching on live stream are ready to go, I suspect. So I would say, let's get going, Ashishji.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Mukherjee. I welcome all our CHT scholars to our 6th session, session number 6 of this 2020-2021 CHT course. Today is an exciting day, and I will tell you in one slide all about it. Let me do this. Let me share my screen for you, and let's start with our usual prayer. This is a prayer from Taittiriya Upanishad, as all of you probably know by now. We start, it's a tradition. This Upanishad was written according to the Western scholar as recent as 1998 in the 600 BC. So I will request all the scholars to, wherever you are sitting, feel the stillness in yourself and recite with me if possible. But I know that there are restrictions on Zoom that we cannot do all together, but you can just follow. I'll first say in the language Sanskrit and then say its translation in English. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavirya Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Om, may we both be protected. May we both be nourished. May we work together with great energy. May our knowledge be radiant. May there be no difference or disputes between us. Om, peace, peace, peace. And as you know, when you say both, it's the students and the teachers. Thank you all. All right, so I like to start with the course, what we will cover. I will go over the session topics a bit, and I will also talk about homework. As you remember, I was your faculty associate. I had the privilege of playing that role for the very first session on October 11th this year. I am back again. And I'm so glad that I'm here to welcome you to a very inspiring special session today. Two reasons I think it will be a memorable session for all of us. First, we have a panel of distinguished scholars from different faiths who will tell us about the role of community service in those traditions. And secondly, we'll be talking about very hands-on projects for you. No theory. We'll discuss how to outreach and how to serve the community in very specific practical terms. And Dr. Kailash Joshi will talk about picking these what we call Om Dollar projects. I'm sure you are all excited about these projects. We are all here to serve our fellow beings. That's the purpose of this CHT course, our community, serving our community at large. You'll remember Vijayji's session on Vedantic philosophy, divinity is all within us. And if the divine exists in all men and women, then we must love and serve them all. In a talk at the Thousand Island Park, New York in 1895, Swami Vivekananda was teaching the philosophy of Vedanta, and he said, "Let the giver kneel down and give thanks. Let the receiver stand up and permit. See the Lord back on every being and give to him. Serving all these is the same as serving God himself." And this community service is the theme of course, Hinduism, but it is core of every religion. Today, and in our October 11 class, you will remember I quoted from Jerusalem Talmud, the Sanhedrin 4:1. Whoever saves a life, it is considered as if he saved an entire world. Today, we are so fortunate to have this panel of experts from 4 traditions, and we learn how these faiths inspire millions of people to serve their fellow beings. And Dr. Mukund Acharya, resident faculty of HCI and chair of Ananda course, will moderate this panel. So that is the very first 1:10 to 3:10 p.m. today. And he will introduce all the panelists. And then we'll take a short break of 20 minutes. At 3:30, Dr. Kailash Joshi will start the introduction to Om Dollar projects and community outreach. And we'll go over then the session 1 and both the session homework as well as the Om Dollar project service plans. And we'll have a 10-minute closing discussion and review of learning objectives and homework. And at 5 p.m., we'll have a closing prayer and adjourn. And I will also go over the homework quickly. Today's session, as I mentioned, therefore, SKIL 300 is where you will attend a panel session where Dr. Mukund Acharya will introduce the panelists, and then you are all very familiar with our faculties today. Dr. Kailash Joshi, he is the president of HCI. Dr. Mukund Acharya, he is the resident faculty as well as the head of our Ananda course. And I am, this is Ashish Khan. I am your faculty associate. And the number of units is 2 units for SKIL 300 and 1 unit for the other one. And I have gone through this, best practices of community service in different faiths. And I would like you to think of questions because this is what we will all learn. Role of spiritual and tradition-based assistance in the Hindu culture, Hindu religion, and also in the other religions, the Christian, Islamic, Jewish, and Sikh. What is the related history, tradition, role, and importance? You will learn, you can ask questions. Is it organized, etc., etc.? And then the second one, as I said, is specific learning objectives. It will be dedicated to the session 1 homework. It'll be, and lastly, I'll take 1 minute to go over the homework. We'll go over before, but as everyone knows that it will be better if you already know what homework you will be doing. You guys did a phenomenal job in the homework of the very first session where I was the faculty associate. You reached out, 13 of you actually reached out to various organizations like senior homes and hospitals and schools and so on, in spite of this COVID pandemic. And it is a follow-on to that. So we'll suggest you reach out to 2 of your non-Hindu friends and dialogue about community service in their traditions. And you have already will be learning a lot about that. So highlight 2 aspects, identify 2 aspects of Hindu tradition of service and seva that appeal to you, and make recommendations based on some of your discussion, how to enrich the CHT course and HCI mission, and also reach the last one regarding Dr. Kailash Joshi's session. We are requesting you to reach out to one of the institutions that you have already contacted that I just mentioned and offer 1 to 2 hours of service in an area of mutual interest. So, and you will also be discussing the Om Dollar project. With that in mind, I'm sorry, I might have exceeded my 10 minutes. You already know my email, my phone number. I'll maybe adding the Slack channel and other ways to reach me. And the grades will be M+ or M-. We have explained all. And it will be due date is Sunday, December 20 in 2 weeks from now. And I'll be able to finish in 2 weeks from that time. With that in mind, here is, now I am handing over to Dr. Mukund Acharya for the panel session. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ashish ji. Would you be able to give me screen sharing capability?
Yeah, let me see if, are you?
We'll have to do that for each of us panelists in turn.
Right.
Done.
Done, right? Gaurabji, you have already done it, looks like, right?
Yes, I have it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So let me know when you can see my presentation.
We are seeing.
I can see it.
Excellent. So as Ashish ji pointed out, the first part of this today's session is going to cover a panel discussion on the role and significance of community service in other religions and traditions. We are broadcasting, in addition to this, the Zoom classroom today, we are also broadcasting, live streaming this to a number of people in the community. So I think it makes good sense to start off with providing a little bit of context for both our panelists as well as for those who are out there listening to us. The Hindu Community Institute essentially has, as part of its mission, what I would call 2 main pillars of service. The first one is this course that we are currently engaged in, the Counselor of Hindu Tradition course, the CHT course. This is something that we teach in an academic year over 24 Sundays. And then we have the culmination is a certification as a Counselor of Hindu Tradition. The goal being then to be better trained to go out and be of service in the community. As a parallel to that, that's our first pillar. A second pillar is community service itself. And as Ashish ji pointed out, we're in the process of developing and standing up our the Hindu Communities Institute, HCI's own community service organization in the Bay Area in particular, which we are going to call Ananda Core. And once we've established and set that up, we hope to be able to provide all the knowledge and information and resources for those who want to replicate this kind of a community service in their local organizations. So the CHT program is modeled on what we call a service learning concept. This is for people who want to serve the community, but have their service grounded in the rich wisdom and traditions that Hinduism provides, as embodied in the Bhagavad Gita and other rich texts that Hinduism has to offer. On this, we build several lessons on counseling skills, on how to interact with people, communications, effective listening, compassionate presence, those kinds of skills that we need to interact with each other and with people in the community. We build on it some specialty knowledge in various areas where this knowledge can be utilized in or is necessary to serve effectively. So this pyramid of learning culminates then in our ability to serve better than we are able to do now. And on the service side, we bring our motivation, our reflections, our constant practice and experience in the community to do our best, and then bring that experience back into the learning so that there's a two-way street that's built, right? So if you think about service in the context of Hinduism, what lies at this central tenet of it is what's called karma yoga, and I'd like to spend a couple of minutes reflecting on karma yoga. It's one of the four paths. It is the yoga of action. It's about purifying your heart by learning to act selflessly in the service of others. Through karma yoga, we learn kindness and compassion without any expectation of gain. The idea here is that learning these lessons helps us step away from our own ego and frees up to move one step further in the path of enlightenment. That's the path that yoga takes us to, right? So service can be a powerful means of releasing ourselves from our ego, learning to act from pure intention, and connecting with the bigger picture, right? Service is at the heart of karma yoga and emphasizing the importance of giving back to people. Now, Swami Shivananda, in his Yoga of Synthesis teachings, says that this is where we begin aligning our focus to benefit of humanity so that we may further step into the experience of self. So it's in the act of trying to reach enlightenment, of understanding ourselves, that we go through the path of karma yoga. So we dedicate this work as an offering with no thought of personal reward. So this law of karma is one of the fundamental doctrines, not only in Hinduism, but also in Buddhism and Jainism, right? So this is the background that the Hindu wisdom and tradition brings to the table. But we as diaspora here in the US, ask, how can we take these learnings, this rich tradition, and all the other knowledge that we obtain to increase our reach in the community? How can we increase our reach of community service? And what better way than learning from other people, right? So, and that's the background for today's session. We understand that spiritual tradition plays an important role in our community. But by and large, from what we've seen, the organization and coupling with our religious practice is at best ad hoc, and it's grassroots driven primarily. Those who seek assistance, those who would like some kind of connection with community for help, have to look for it typically through their priests or friends or family, or some guru whom they have learned to, whose thoughts and wisdom they follow. And likewise, on the other hand, those of us who want to provide assistance end up organizing our local networks to offer the service that we would like to provide. So we need to have some kind of an institutional way of connecting the service and the need, which is what we're looking for as we develop our Ananda course structure. And so we ask ourselves, can we learn how to do this better from the other religions and traditions? do they have more efficient, centralized and institution approaches that we can adapt? Can we learn from and adopt their best practices? However good we are, one of the fundamental things is we can always become better. We can always learn from others, and that is one of the approaches that we use actively as we go forward at the HCI to achieve this goal. So in that context, I'm delighted that we were able to pull together this wonderful, rich panel of experts that are with us today, representing 4 different faiths: Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and Sikhism. I could probably spend better part of the next half hour talking about these people, but enough to say that they are learned members of the community, rich in the tradition of their faith, and they have a lot of knowledge that they can impart to us, and we are excited to be able to listen to them and learn from them in the next hour or so. Reverend Peter Ilgenfritz is a former pastor at the University of Congregational United Church of Christ in Seattle. He's now currently on the East Coast, and he is also rich in other talents. He's a poet. I've looked at some of his work online. He's a sailor, and one thing I've never learned to do is sail. And he has founded recently a program called Navigating Through Change that brings together his experience as a sailor and on turbulent seas to help us drive to seek calmer waters, so to speak, as we go through these turbulent times. Professor Farid Senzai is locally here at the University of Santa Clara. He's a professor in the Department of Political Science, and he brings to us a rich base of knowledge in political science, in the history of Islam, in the community activity and charities of Islam that we can draw upon in our effort to understand how to do things better. For Judaism, we've turned to Rabbi Hugh Said Valencia. He's also local here in Silicon Valley. He leads he's the director of collaborative leadership and Jewish engagement in a center here in Silicon Valley and lives in San Jose. And finally, last but not least, we're delighted to have with us Jesse Kaur. Jesse G is a talent acquisition consultant in Silicon Valley, but that is just one of her several talents, I would say. She has done extensive study in the of the Sikh religion, of religious and Gurmat studies. She's a well-known scholar who's written a number of books for both adults and children in this area, and she brings to us a lot of wisdom and knowledge that that we hope to draw upon. So this is the panel that we are delighted to have talk to us today. And there's about a half a dozen questions that I asked each of them to think about as they prepare to talk to us. What is the history, tradition, role, and importance of community service in their faith? Is it organized? How so? Is it institutionalized? Are there ways is the infrastructure in place that can be leveraged? How is service provided? How is it accessed? And then if as you look back into your own the way your own faith and tradition provides a service, what are the best practices that presumably have been held over a couple of hundred years or more that you would recommend that others like us can adopt and learn from and make our service better? And then this is an interesting question, I thought, that each of them could address this, if not during their lecture, in the Q&A panel discussion that's to follow. What do you think you have learned from other religions and practices and traditions? As we go out and ask you, did you look to others and learn from them and benefit from them? So that's another question I thought that we might address. So the way we're going to do this is we have about a 15-minute presentation from each of the panel members. So as you think of questions to ask them, please hold those questions, note them down. There'll be plenty of time for discussion afterwards. And then once each of them in turn is done with their presentations, we will turn to an open discussion and Q&A. So with that, I will hand over the screen to the panelists, and we'll go in the same order that we listed you. Just it's a random list order. So Reverend Peter, if I know you don't have any slides to present, you would just talk. So the floor is yours, sir. You're on mute, by the way.
Thank you. First of all, it's a real honor and privilege to be with you all this afternoon. So Mukund, thank you for your invitation. I have spent my career as a pastor in the United Church of Christ, which is a Protestant denomination, and at the most progressive or liberal end of the Christian church. And we date some of our roots back to the Pilgrims. I was delighted to be part of this panel because it was community service that drew me into being a pastor. I've spent almost half my life as a pastor at a large urban congregation in Seattle, University Congregational Church, where I was there for 25 years. And before that, I ran an AIDS organization in Chicago in the late 80s, early 90s. And most recently, I've felt a real call to walk with individuals and communities through times of change and transition, which has led me to be an interim pastor here in a small church, about 300 members in Mid-Coast, Maine. Now, if you've never been to Maine, I live right at the dot, about an hour and 15 minutes up from Portland, Maine. And I haven't lived in a rural community ever. So a lot of new discoveries. And I want to speak to you today really out of a very local context of what some ways for us to think about how Christianity addresses and lives out a commitment to community service. And may I just say this, if you were to drive into Booth Bay Harbor, Maine, you'd see a little sign there welcoming you to the town, and these words in Latin below that say, Pellegrinus cibum dedimus, which means we fed the pilgrims. And indeed, there were these little fishing villages here, including right off the coast in Damerscove Island, that were here and did help the pilgrims through their first winter. So even in this local context, a long history of service and complication, as I will get to later. But if you were to come to church this morning, you would hear throughout our Zoom congregation, Zoom meeting or meeting all online for worship, community service run through the whole service. You would hear at the beginning of the service a celebration of last Thanksgiving. We had 30 people in the church that came together who love to cook, that made food to share with 50 different people in the community who were going to be alone, who were going to be isolated, who just needed some encouragement of a Thanksgiving meal. And a whole group of people from church distributed that on Thanksgiving Sunday. You would also have heard this morning at the beginning of the service an invitation for people to make or bring a hat or a set of gloves to church for a big collection during this season of Advent, which is right before Christmas, and Christmas, to share with people throughout the wider community. So, as the speaker said, people could have warm extremities, warm heads, warm hands for a cold Maine winter. You would have heard later in the service about an invitation to give a virtual poinsettia in a world where all of our lives have become virtual. Instead of sending real flowers to the church and an empty congregation, make a donation to the Fuel Assistance Fund in memory or in celebration of someone. And all of that money that we raise will go to support fuel assistance in the wider community. And you would have heard a sermon this morning that was all about climate change and about how we needed to listen to Native American wisdom about relationship to the earth and ways that compelled us to live differently together and on the earth. So you could come to the Congregational Church of Boothbay Harbor this morning and hear all that and wonder, is this any different than the Rotary Club or a community service group? And what makes this particular to a church doing this and carrying this out? Towards the end of the service today, we celebrated communion. And for me, communion brings together the real heart of all of this community service, as I shared, like you would have heard this morning, in this small church, in this particular context, doing all this reaching out about communion answers the question about why. Why is this Christian community here doing all this? And during that part of the service, you would have seen me take some bread and remembering the last night of Jesus' life, when he gathered together with his friends and he took bread and blessed it and broke it and shared it with his friends and said, "This is my body broken and given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Take, bless, break, and most importantly, share. And as followers of Jesus, it's those words about embodying what Christians have called the kingdom of God, something that is already present and yet also not fully present, and to embody, bring about that kingdom of God, that communion of God, that peace of God, that justice of God, that love of God. How? Through our actions. Because Jesus reminds his followers that God is not out there somewhere, but that God is here, and particularly for Christians, in all of the countless ways that God can be present in creation, in community, and through Jesus is right here in the intimacy of us together is the key way for Christians that we get to know and meet God. So that whole following of Jesus brings us back again and again to each other and to creating this kingdom of God. So it's something deeply essential to an understanding of being a Christian. Now, as I said, I can speak of that out of my own context as a Protestant, and as I said, a liberal Protestant. If you were to have an evangelical Christian here or a Roman Catholic here or an Orthodox Christian here, they would also, maybe with some different language or some different ways, make that essential connection between being a follower of Jesus and doing the work that Christ calls us to do. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Always we're thrust back on this discovery of Christ, this discovery of God among us and within us here in our relationship with each other. At the service today, you would have seen me wear what perhaps you've seen a minister wear around their neck. And this is called a stole. And I asked a friend of mine, I said, Leanne, do you know what this represents? And she said, that you're holy? And I said, no, you missed that day of church school. It doesn't mean anything about holiness, but what it is, when Jesus, it's a symbol for a pastor, and this is literally a dish towel. And a stole is like a symbolic towel that Jesus used to what? Wash people's feet. So it's a symbol of service. So in my own vocation as a pastor, that stole always reminds me that my first and foremost call is to serve. And that's what that reminds me of, and reminds the community of, that's what I'm here for and about. As I started my reflection, I shared with you all these ways that we do community service. And in my denomination, in the United Church of Christ, we're a denomination that's known for our work in social justice, in our work in race relations, in LGBTQ inclusion, and in justice in a whole host of different ways. And in my denomination, sometimes we can forget the very reasons about why are we running around and doing all this work? What's all this community service all about? And I must say that is why I have needed the engagement and the practice of others to ground me and remind me what all this work is about. As I said, in Christianity comes in communion. For me, I've also been a practicing Zen Buddhist for the past 16 years. And one of the pieces I really appreciate about Zen is many things, but it draws me down to the contemplative practice of why all this running around, why all this doing. And one of the, I have a friend who's a Zen Buddhist priest, and she said, Peter, you Christians are always running around trying to save the world and run yourselves out. And what's all that about? One of the pieces that Zen reminds you of, and Buddhism reminds you of, is you have to wait. You have to wait for an opening, wait for an opportunity. And I must say that's a challenge for many Christians to do that. I must also say that I am also gifted by just being with you today because of the particular piece I learned about Hinduism today from karma yoga, a practice of this community service being about letting go of, dissipating, quieting your ego. And I must say, and some of us could tell our own stories about, we have borne the brunt of Christian egos who've been running around and trying to do a lot of community service, to do a lot of saving and working and solving, and caused in the midst of it a lot of oppression and a lot of violence. And that also is part of our tradition as well. And I'll just end by saying, when we think about ways to do this, one of my joys of being an interim pastor here between their last pastor and their pastor who will be coming sometime in this next year is to be able to do brainstorming work with this community of imagining new ways to be a church in the community. And one of the things we've done is to hold community service brainstorming events. We had one last week that brought together a couple of members of our congregation with other community leaders in the wider community, including the Rotary, YMCA, host of different community groups, the library. And together we had a Zoom meeting to brainstorm headlines. What's a headline that you would hear right now in the Booth Bay Register about what life is like here? And if we could imagine a year from now, let's brainstorm what is something that we did together to make a difference in this community during this most challenging time for people throughout our world, and in the particularities of our own lives in crisis as we live through this pandemic. So, thanks.
So thank you so much, Reverend Peter. Listening to you, I'm brimming with questions, so I find it difficult for myself to violate my own edict to save all questions at the end, but I will do so, and I'll come back to you with a few. Let's move forward with the sequence, and Professor Farid, we'd like to hear from you next.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Dr. Mukund and Ashish, for this invitation. I very much appreciate it, to having this opportunity to talk about Muslims and Islam in terms of their contributions to service and community engagement. You know, I'm a professor of political science. I teach at a university in the Bay Area, Santa Clara University, which is a Jesuit university. In many ways, I feel very welcome and happy there at a university like Santa Clara, because the university itself focuses so much on social service and social justice and giving back to the community. And so it lends well for someone like me who is a Muslim and engaged in the community as well. What I'd like to do in my few minutes that I have is to give you a general sense of the history of Muslims in the United States and how they have engaged in service and providing service. Hopefully, you know, as we said that there can be lessons learned. For us, it's really been a growing process of learning how to provide service, not only to the community, but to the general public more generally. What I'll do is go ahead and share my screen. Let's see here. There we go. Hopefully you're all able to see this.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so let me just give you a broad overview of the community, and I'll do this relatively quickly so I can keep in within my time. So the Muslim community, I mean, some people assume that Muslims have just recently arrived in the U.S. I mean, Muslims have been here since the very founding of this country. Some scholars have suggested that 25%, 1 out of 4 Muslims coming in as slaves were in fact Muslims. So Islam is deep rooted in the very founding of this country. In particular, of course, this is the African-American Muslims that came here from the very beginning. But large waves of Muslims from other parts of the world started to come. For instance, Arab Muslims from Arab countries in the 1920s, and then you had Muslims from South Asia, and there are other parts of the Middle East, for instance, started to come after the immigration laws changed in the mid-1960s. And then, of course, due to war and conflict in many countries, you had another wave of Muslims that started to come in the 1980s. I mean, my own family, I'm originally from Afghanistan, was born in Afghanistan. My family came after the Soviet invasion. And so due to war, many people came to the United States and started to establish themselves here. Now, initially, most Muslims that came to the United States were primarily interested in just sort of addressing basic needs of the community. And that was initially focused first and foremost on earning a living and being able to live in the United States. So many of them came for educational purposes. Over time, they then started to establish themselves, and slowly the community began to grow. In terms of the organizations that were built, you began to see this evolution that took place for Muslims, that initially it was primarily building mosques across the country. And you see mosques that have been built, going back at the turn of the century in the 1900s, for instance, all over the country, especially in places like Detroit, Michigan, and in Chicago, for instance, on the East Coast, you're seeing mosques that have been built. But over the decades, you begin to see that the community has started to engage in providing services as well. Now, initially, the focus was very disorganized. It wasn't institutionalized. It involved protest efforts. For instance, if something was happening in many of their home countries, places of origin for many of these Muslims, they started to organize around those in the form of protests. But slowly you began to see Muslims finding ways to do it in a much more organized fashion, institutionalize their effort, and then begin to actually build institutions. Now, mind you, we should be clear that African-American Muslims that have been here, as I said, since the very founding of this country, they have been at the forefront of organizing and providing services as long as we can remember. I mean, they've been doing it for a very, very long time. But yet immigrant Muslims from South Asia and the Arab countries, for instance, in the Middle East and elsewhere, they were far less organized in their efforts. So lessons learned were often from the African-American Muslims that had this long tradition and history of community service. And so the immigrant Muslims began to learn from that experience, as well as, of course, learning from other faith traditions and others that had been far more effective in providing some of these services. Just generally, if I tell you about the community itself, it's relatively small community. I was involved in several research projects that tried to assess how many Muslims live in the United States. In 2007, we conducted a study with the Pew Research Center, which found that there were about 2.35 million Muslims. That has continually grown at a steady pace. In 2011, there was another study that suggests, a follow-up of the Pew study suggested that the number had grown to 2.75 million Muslims. In 2017, just 3 years ago, the most recent study suggested there's about 3.45 million, about 3.5 million Muslims in the United States. Today, there's probably, let's say, close to 4 million Muslims. So it's just over 1% of the population, not very large. If you sort of look at the other faith traditions, Muslims are still relatively small relative to the general population. As I said, we can look at the demographic makeup primarily from at least the immigrant Muslims from South Asia, for instance, Pakistan, which constitutes the largest percentage of immigrant Muslims, and then, of course, Arab countries that many Muslims came as immigrants. Other parts of Asia, including Iran, for instance, as well as East Asia, Malaysia and Indonesia, for instance, Muslim coming here, as well as Africa, and even European Muslims that have come here. African-American or Black Muslims have been here, as I said, from the very beginning. It still constitutes a fairly large percentage of the population. This is a breakdown. I can go into great detail to say that this is one of the most diverse communities in the country, religious communities. I mean, we did a study here in the Bay Area and found 52 different countries that were represented, Muslims here in the Bay Area. But you can see that Muslims come from all different walks of life. They come from many different backgrounds. those immigrant Muslims have settled here. They're a very highly educated population. And consequently, because they're highly educated, that has translated into higher income levels. And so you begin to see that immigrant Muslims have very high levels of income, especially in the Bay Area, where it's significantly higher than the local population. And nationally, it's higher than the general public, the income levels among many immigrant Muslims, South Asians in particular, then Arabs. Now, African-American Muslims tends to have a much lower, they're in the lower income bracket than other immigrant Muslims. Now, the reason I point that out is because that has helped contribute to the effort for Muslims to organize themselves and financially contribute and pay for the institutions that they have built. Muslims generally are quite happy and integrated. As if you compare Muslims in the United States versus Muslims in Europe, for instance, you see far less levels of integration in many countries in Europe, while here, you see that it's quite high compared to even other faith traditions. Well, this study that was done by an organization that I was one of the founders of, ISPU, the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, which does research on American Muslims, found that 37% of Muslims are satisfied with the direction of the country, and they're generally satisfied not only because they're integrated, but because financially they're well off and have done well for themselves. In terms of Islam and charity, religiously, we know that service and giving back is very much sort of foundational within the faith tradition. These are just a few quotes that I pulled from either the Quran or the Hadith or the traditions of Prophet Muhammad, for instance, which highlight and emphasize the idea of giving back. Those who spend in charity will be richly rewarded. Every act of kindness is a form of charity. Even, smiling is a form of charity. Giving back financially is a form of charity, and Muslims are encouraged to give back, not only locally, but elsewhere as well. And so you see that this is very much foundational and religiously emphasized. And so Muslims have taken that idea of giving back and translated that into institutions. And so the institutions that have been built over the years, while, as I mentioned, initially were focused on worship and building mosques, that slowly over the years and the decades started to translate into educational institutions, political engagement, community involvement in community organizations. You see health and medical clinics, for instance, built all across the country, relief organizations, both local relief organizations, food banks, for instance, as well as international relief, where Muslims are raising money, and then sort of more civil rights and social justice oriented organizations that have been built. And you see, I've been here since the early 1980s, for instance. You see the evolution of Muslim organizations, where initially they were relatively small. They ran on very, very small budgets, and often most of the people that worked in these organizations were volunteers, and so there weren't paid staff. But you begin to see that as the income levels of the community has risen, the ability of the community to raise money, large sums of money, has translated into larger organizations, institutions, and paid staff. And so you begin to see organizations with professional staffs. And this is another finding that we have seen, that initially, for instance, people sort of the best and brightest within the Muslim community that went to the best and brightest universities were less likely to ever work for a Muslim organizations. They may have done it on the side as a volunteer and just sort of a sense of charity of giving back to the community, mostly because these organizations weren't professionally run. And so there was this stigma against working within Muslim organizations. But you see that change over the decades, where Muslim organizations are being run much more professionally. And therefore, there is a desire, in fact, for individuals who have degrees and professional experience to often work for these Muslim institutions. And the pay, in fact, has also gone up, where they now are being paid much more competitively within these organizations, to the point now where some of these organizations, many of them I could list, that now have professional staff that includes non-Muslims. And so people from other traditions, as well as people that are not of any faith, for instance, applying for jobs at many of these organizations. And so you see, for instance, this engagement begin to expand. Still, I have a lot of graphs and statistics. I won't bore you with them, and I'll just share them with the group afterwards. You can see these, but you can see that we're on par with other community engagement, Muslims, Jews, Catholics, all around 44-46%. So it's quite consistent in terms of the level of community engagement. And this then translates into, as I said, political engagement. It's still relatively lower than the general public, but you see that Muslims, those that voted in 2016, it was 61%. Registered to vote in the most recent election, you see 73%. So you're seeing that this is a shift that has taken place over the decades. In the 80s, the numbers were far lower. And so this then suggests that Muslims are much more active, much more involved. And, you can break this down and looking at how that is translated into volunteering, for instance. Look, you see that volunteering actually is quite consistent with other traditions. In fact, higher than some of the other traditions here. So I have a lot of graphs. I will sort of keep it just to some of the major highlights. You can see some of the statistics later. These are some of the major institutions and national organizations that exist. ISNA, the one in the far left, Islamic Society of North America, is the major umbrella organization that exists. Muslim Public Affairs Council, for instance, engaged in political engagement. Engage, which is right below it, is another one that has recently come on the scene and become very, very active. CARE, for instance, the Council on American Islamic Relations, deals with civil rights issues. ISPU, which is one of the organizations I founded, deals with research on Muslims. International Institute of Islamic Thought has been looking at much more sort of religiously the issues of Islam and how they can be translated into the issues that Muslims face both here and abroad. Islamic Relief is another major institution that provides millions and millions of dollars to relief related issues all across the globe. Ummah, for instance, is a major clinic here in the United States, based initially in Los Angeles and has branches everywhere, providing free health clinic for Muslims and others. And so it's open to the community, so providing free health services to local communities. There's scholarship funds, for instance. There's foundations that are being built. And so you're beginning to see all of these types of institutions that are now built and have professional staff that are running them, and very competitive salaries that are being paid. So that has translated into institutions that are becoming much more transparent. They are becoming much more accountable. They have very strong boards. They're really sort of institutionalizing their effort. And so you see this evolution that has taken place over the decades. And today, the community is in a much stronger place than it was over the, let's say, 3-4 decades ago. But I suspect that it will continue to grow in the years and decades ahead. So hopefully that was helpful in terms of a broad overview of the community. I'd be glad to share any more insight and details to some of the surveys and statistics that I had. But I will stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Farid. I do have a bunch of questions, but as I said, I'll hold them off till we get to the Q&A and the panel discussion portion. I'd like next to invite Rabbi Hugh to unmute and share his screen and talk to us. Rabbi?
Wonderful, thank you. I will go ahead and share my screen and start my presentation.
Yeah, we can see it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you today. It's such a wonderful experience just listening to the other panelists. Really delighted to be here with you. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about Judaism and community service, and there's so much to be said. So I'm going to kind of, instead of trying to be encyclopedic and take all of our time to do this, I'm going to really focus on my own situation and give you a sense for one idiosyncratic rabbi's position in this world of Judaism and community service. I'll say that I am in a particular moment in how the Jewish community aligns in Silicon Valley, and I want to kind of give you a sense for that. So in my bio, it said that I am the Director of Collaborative Leadership and Jewish Engagement for the Addison Penzak Jewish Community Center, and that's actually accurate. The Community Center, the Jewish Community Center, is part of a national web of Jewish community centers. And our Jewish Community Center is in the process of merging with our Jewish Federation, which also falls in a national network of Jewish community federations. And these two agencies are merging. We actually voted last week. The memberships of both organizations voted to merge last week. And we are becoming Jewish Silicon Valley. So those two legacy agencies are merging to become a new agency that's combining the functions of the Jewish Community Center and the Jewish Federation. And my role, my emerging role, is to help leadership throughout Jewish Silicon Valley collaborate and engage in community. Just to give you a sense for some of the agencies that are at play in terms of that dynamic. So the Jewish Federation of Silicon Valley is part, again, of a national network of the Jewish Federations of North America. The federations themselves are inheritors of a kind of medieval model of the kihila, of the Jewish community. So before emancipation, before Jews became citizens of the countries in which they found themselves in Europe around the 1700s, they were part of just the Jewish community. And that community in Europe and in North Africa was responsible for raising taxes, supporting social services, in some cases building and maintaining roads, so they really provided the infrastructure of that community. And I want to say that in Judaism, I have a sense that it's since emancipation really that we have this idea of being individuals, right? Before that, I have the sense that there was much less ego separation. There was the sense that Kol Yisrael arevim ze lazeh. All of Israel is responsible one for another. And that goes back to really Israelite society, in which the distinction between self and other, I think, was conceived of at the family level at least, and maybe even at the tribal level. We have in the rabbinic period ideas like the world stands on three things. This is from Pirkei Avot, from the Ethics of the Ancestors. Around 150 of the Common Era gets compiled in its oral form. And very early in the text, it says, Simon the Righteous, Shimon HaTzadik, said, the world is founded on three things: on avodah, on worship, on Torah, on learning, and on gmilut chasadim, on acts of loving kindness. So that sense that acts of loving kindness are built in, it's foundational. Okay, so that sense, right, that the Jewish federations inherit the kind of umbrella function of managing communities. So they would, it was commonplace in the last century for Jews to pay their synagogue dues, to be part of a synagogue community, and then also contribute to the Jewish federation of their local communities' national annual campaign. And that annual campaign would then go to support all of the other communal agencies in the region. The federations have this kind of planning and convening and fundraising functions. Then Jewish community centers in localities would take on kind of the cultural, educational, social functions of the community. The Jewish community relations councils in regions would provide the link between the Jewish community and other faith traditions, other communal organizations. And then Jewish agencies, homes for the aged, day schools that provided education, social service agencies also would be involved, as well as synagogues and temples, religious institutions. And so in our own community in Silicon Valley, the Jewish Federation, the Jewish Community Center, and the Jewish Community Relations Council are really coming together in this current moment to form Jewish Silicon Valley. So I wanted to see if I can advance my slide. There we go. Oops. I wanted to give you some core terms, and I'm going to show this brief video. It's about 3 minutes long. From Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg, who's a writer and scholar. And I want to just note that she is producing this video through an organization called BIMBOM that provides educational videos, this platform of educational videos. And one of the things that I want to say is that American Jews take very seriously this notion of educating for social justice, right? Enculturating people into this notion that we aren't just distinct individuals, that we are part of a common whole. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg to provide these core terms for this notion of social service. I'm not sure that the sound is working though. Unfortunately, no sound. Basically, she's making a distinction
Rabbi,
between.
you might have to check a button that says share sound while you're sharing.
Okay.
Share again, yeah.
Let me try that.
In your settings, you have to go share computer sound, I believe it will say.
In the Zoom settings.
Yes.
No, just stop sharing. And when you try to share again, on the bottom, there's going to be a couple of check boxes. Yes.
Okay. Share computer sound. Got it. Thank you so much. Let's try that now.
We all want to be helpful, I think, to people in need. There are a lot of different things that can look like. So
okay,
today we're going
I don't want to. I'll just summarize what she does here, and if you'd like, you can go back and search for Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg on Chesed. So she's explaining the distinction between Chesed, which are acts of loving kindness, acts of direct service, right? So she uses the example of addressing hunger, right? So acts of Chesed would be to provide food for those who need it. So chesed on the one hand, acts of loving kindness, acts of direct service. Tzedakah, which are charitable donations, but as opposed to the English word charity, which comes from caritas, this act of kind of full-heartedness. Tzedakah comes from a root that means the word tzedek, which means justice. So this notion of giving money, it's commanded. It's not You don't do it because you feel moved to, you do it because it is the just thing to do. And then tzedek, right, that third term is the word for justice or righteousness. And these are, tzedek work is really the work of social action, the kind of ongoing organizing and systems changing to change the ways in which hunger gets addressed more systemically, for example. So that's what she does there. And I'm sorry for the technical difficulties, but I wanted to give you a sense for how in the Jewish community, in my community in particular, we educate for these different ways of contributing to the whole. All right, so education for tzedakah, education for charitable giving, for righteous giving. I put a picture from our preschool at the Jewish Community Center, and these children are learning to collect and sort money to give to, and so traditionally I've given you an image of a pushka, and a pushka it's a Yiddish word for a tzedakah box, a box to collect coins. And these coins traditionally were put out by Keren Kayemet Yisrael, the Israel National Fund to buy land and buy trees in Israel. This is my family's pushka. You can see it's not affiliated with any organization, and we collect money and then we decide where it goes, as opposed to some umbrella organization deciding where it goes. And that's a shift in kind of contemporary Judaism. So these children in the preschool are learning to collect and sort money, and then they are going to use that money in a program that's put out by the Jewish Family Services, also on our campus, called Embrace a Family. And this is associated with the holiday of Hanukkah. People buy a gift to present to a family in need. And then the tzedek there, the social justice, is it's a fellowship program for young adults to learn social justice. So that's just a snapshot of some means of educating for tzedakah. Educating for chesed, for these acts of loving kindness, for direct service work. So in many synagogue communities, in many religious institutions, synagogues, they will have mitzvah days. They will have days that are dedicated to social action, where people will divide up into groups. Each group is led by a lay leader, by a volunteer, and they'll volunteer for the day. And really using that service learning model that you talked about earlier, of study and then action and then reflection. So these take place annually. Often in our local community, they happen around Martin Luther King Jr. Day, right? With that sense of a connection to the American national calendar as well. I want to talk a little bit about bar and bat mitzvah service projects, right? This is a relatively contemporary phenomenon in which people during their coming of age ceremonies at age 13 for boys and 12 for girls typically, the people are called to read the Torah for the first time in community. And often associated with that in liberal communities, bar and bat mitzvah students will take on a year's worth of service to a particular organization, and then will present that learning as part of their bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah service, right? Bar mitzvah for boys, bat mitzvahs for girls. And then ongoing chesed work takes place in caring committees, often these committees of volunteers in synagogue settings and other settings that provide direct action to congregants and beyond. In terms of education for tzedek, education for the ongoing work of social justice, some bar and bat mitzvah service projects are less about direct service and more about systemic change. It's not the majority, I think a minority, but some students are able to do that work. And then another program for young adults is this Avodah Jewish Service Corps is a program for 21 through I think 26-year-olds 18-month fellowship in which they live communally and do service work in their communities and learn through doing as well. In terms of ongoing opportunities to volunteer, this notion of tikkun olam committees, right? Tikkun olam is a Hebrew phrase that means repairing the world. This notion that our world is not as it should be, and it's our work to partner with the divine to repair the world. Oftentimes synagogues, in addition to their chesed committees, in addition to their caring committees, will have tikkun olam committees that are interested in systemic change, that work on issues like the environment, on poverty, on criminal justice, etc. I'm not going to talk about Jubilee just in the interest of time, but I will say that Jewish family services, Jewish family and children's services, also they're often regional Jewish family services connected to, and it's part of a national network as well. They are the social service agency, the kind of clearinghouse for social services in our community. And they have a wonderful program in which they employ chaplains, and then those chaplains train para-chaplains, volunteers who go into hospitals and assisted living programs, independent living programs, and support Jewish life and provide care to residents. I will say that that's a good example of a dynamic in which the obligation to visit the sick is obligatory on all Jews, and we have tended to professionalize that in the last, I don't know, 80 years or so, right? There's that sense that the rabbi is the one who visits the sick. And we're working to reinfuse that into the wider community, that sense that all of us are responsible for visiting the sick, and can we train para-chaplains to do that work. And then there's a long tradition of volunteerism in communal organizations. So this notion of lay leadership, of volunteers who work directly with professionals to manage the affairs of our nonprofits. Okay, I guess we're holding questions to the end, but I will say I feel really blessed to be with you, and I'm looking forward to the discussion when we're done with the presentations. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. I'll call on Jesse G next to round up our panel and talk to us about learnings from the Sikh faith. Jesse G, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and what an honor and a privilege to be here, and especially to be the last one where I get an opportunity to listen to such luminaries talking about community service. Mukunji, could you share my presentation? The reason is I had to leave my home because there was some construction going on, and I'm using a different computer in my husband's office. So if you could share that, that would be very helpful. Thank you so much.
Okay, just give me a minute and I will get to your presentation.
Sure. So while Mukunji is finding the presentation, I want to start off with saying that, you know, the roots of any learning begin just like in individuals, in communities as well, in the very early years of the founding of the faith tradition. Just like with little children, we teach them the values, whatever our values might be, universal values, hopefully. Similarly, the Sikh community really gets its lessons about community service from the very beginnings of the Sikh tradition by Guru Nanak. So let me begin with a story that many of you may or may not have heard. So Guru Nanak was a Messiah, a messenger of God. I wanted to go to the next one. Let's see, how do I, okay, great. Is there a way that I can control this, Mukunji?
Not since I'm sharing, you just have to tell me to move to the next slide.
Okay. Thank you so much. Sorry to be inconveniencing you on this.
Not a problem, please.
So Guru Nanak, as a young lad, was very disinterested in commerce and worldly affairs. And his father, who was a merchant in a village called Talwandi, was very, I would say, very concerned about the lack of interest that his son was showing in matters of business. So he called him over one day and said, look, son, you're young enough to get into the family business. Here is some money, and I would like you to make a good profit out of it. And the term he used was sacha sauda. Go ahead and make some decent profit doing a good trade and come back and show me what you've done. So Guru Nanak, with this bag of money and a friend, set out to go to town. And on the way, he found some poor people who were very hungry, a whole band of them. And he stopped right there and he told his friend, let's buy some groceries and feed them. So the friend was a little bit more worldly wise and he said, no, we have some business to do. We have to go to town and we have to buy groceries and we have to sell them. And this is not what we're supposed to do. He goes, no, never mind. I'm supposed to make a good profit. I'm supposed to do a good trade. So right there, young Guru Nanak, probably in his early to mid-teens, 17, 18 years old, bought food, cooked it and served it to the band of hungry people that were there. So he came home and dad wanted to know what had he done and what profit had he made. And he said, well, you wanted me to make a decent profit based on a good trade. I fed the hungry. And he said, well, but where is the profit? He said, well, that is the profit. That is how you make the best profit, by feeding the hungry. So that sense of service started right during the life of Guru Nanak, and it has somehow become foundational to the Sikh community. It's become the very core of the Sikh faith tradition to serve. And let's go to the next slide, please. So this was known as langar, and it was also based on three different, I'm going to keep this very, very short, three principles of living, which was before you can serve, you have to make an honest living. Serving becomes hypocritical when it's not based on righteous living. The next golden principle that he gave was sharing of resources, not just of food, but of your wealth, of your knowledge, of your time, of your food, listening, empathy, just about everything. One chakna, it's called sharing of all the resources, the gifts that you've been given. And then the last one is of living in attunement with the divine, because only then both of the above principles are possible to live. Because otherwise, as some of the earlier speakers said, the ego becomes supreme. And it's through service and through the blessings and the attunement with the divine that the ego can be erased. So next slide. So langar became a very basic, fundamental way to serve. Langar was started by Guru Nanak, but was institutionalized by the third Guru, Guru Ramdas, and he instituted a principle called Pehle Pangat Picho Sangat, meaning sit down together, regardless of caste, creed, religion, gender, sit down on the floor in a line, indicating that there is an equal seat on the table for everyone. And the food is to be cooked by volunteers, served by volunteers, made from the money donated by volunteers. So this is how langar, which is world famous, started. There is a story that goes that King Emperor Akbar visited Guru Amar Das, and Guru Amar Das asked him to sit down with the commoners and have langar first. And the greatness of Emperor Akbar was that he did sit down with the commoners and had langar, sitting down shoulder to shoulder with his subjects. So that So that was the, how do I say it? That's how langar was elevated in terms of it's for everybody, regardless of your status in life, your religion, your gender, whatever. Now, what I find beautiful is that the concept of langar has been expanded to not just the food, but to just about everything. Lots of organizations over the last, I want to say, several decades, and as the gentleman from the Islamic tradition was saying, as the community prospers, so does the contribution that comes from the community to put into these nonprofits to expand the foundational principles of the community, and so of the faith tradition. So that's exactly what has happened amongst the Sikhs. So lots of nonprofits have come up. They have done service in terms of advocacy. They have done service in terms of providing medicine, opening hospitals, free service. There are doctors that spend a month just doing free eye surgeries, both in the US and in India. There are others that do hip surgeries. This is expanded in the US as well as in other countries, as well as going back to the mother country, motherland, India, where all of these charitable deeds are performed. One of the things that I find very, very touching is that the gurdwaras, which are the houses of worship, have become houses of service. Last year, there was some terrible floods in India, and one of the mosques was destroyed near Delhi. And it was during the time of the fasting when prayers were needed. And one of the gurdwaras opened its doors for the Muslim brothers to come and do their prayers there. So that also is part of the community, because Guru Har Gobind, the 8th Guru, opened mosques where the Golden Temple is. Not far from there, he opened mosques for Muslim followers that were part of his group. So this is really the practice of oneness, where you don't have to convert, where every faith tradition is honored, where the divine prevails in everyone, and you serve everyone thinking that they carry the same light. Having listened to everyone that has gone ahead of me, I feel that it's the same principle that is followed in pretty much every faith tradition. You know why? Because wherever the truth is spoken and practiced, it is the same. There's the same beautiful principles of oneness, of sharing, of helping your brethren, and feeling that neither the one who's helping nor the one who's being helped is other than the one divine, seeing the divine light in everyone. So the way the institutions developed were exactly the way the gurus practiced in their own lifetime, and left footprints, big footprints to follow. And that's pretty much what has been happening in the Sikh community. Let's go on to the next slide. I'm talking fast so that I want to leave more room for Q&A. So in terms of best practices, I remember that when I was barely 5 years old, my grandmother used to take me to the neighborhood Gurdwara and ask me to do shoe seva. And shoe seva is when people come and leave their shoes. You basically dust them, you polish them, you set them up in a straight line. And when people come back after the service, you give it to them. So I was very young when I learned to dust people's shoes and polish them. And then there were days that the Sikh temples would have young people do the service, and we would be asked to do the chor seva, which is waving the chor. I think it's called fly swatter or fly whisk, which is a ceremonial thing that we do over Sri Guru Granth Sahib, the Sikh scripture. And then you learn to do the prayers. So in other words, kids are involved in Gurdwara services from the very time that they are in their early teens or even younger. For 14 or 15 years, my husband and I ran a home Gurdwara once a month where everything was run by youngsters. So we did that for 14 years. In the way it has been institutionalized is that almost every Gurdwara in the US, in other countries, in Canada, in UK, and in India, there are Sunday schools that are run by volunteers, where the language of the scriptures, which is Gurmukhi, is taught, as well as Gurmat, which is the wisdom of the scriptures, is also taught. And then there are youth camps that are run. My brother and I started a nonprofit where we pioneered co-ed youth camps, and we had held them in different parts of India first, in beautiful locations like Pahalgam and Simla and Manali. And then the organization became international, and we started holding them in England and Canada and US. And what it is that kids come for 2 to 3 weeks, and they learn about the message of Gurbani, and they do everything themselves in terms of cooking, serving. Yes, there is some staff to help, but they really, really learn in a very hands-on way to run a whole organization. So they're given opportunities to be leaders. They're given opportunities to be, you call them group leaders and sub-leaders, and then they're promoted when they come next time. So whole structure is there to aid the kids to become responsible citizens of the world. And the lessons of oneness, of universal brotherhood, of seva, all those things are taught at these camps, and leadership opportunities provided. Now, interestingly, college campuses in the US and other places have started adopting some of the seva routines, like langar, like teaching turban tying. Now, turban is something that is very much an article of faith for the Sikhs, and it's not widely understood. A lot of people don't associate the turban with the Sikhs. So Sikhs have become very energized and active in showing people how to tie a turban, and days are dedicated to turban tying. So the best practices have expanded to cover every aspect of Sikh spiritual, community, and social life. So let's move on to the next slide and see if I think there isn't any. And then that was pretty much what I'd wanted to say. And also in terms of what we have learned from other communities, I think the seva done by the Christian community is very, very inspirational. And I'm not sure if Mother Teresa inspired this or this was something that happened on its own, but there is a leper colony in India that is called Pingalwara, that was started by a Sikh gentleman, and he dedicated his entire life to looking after the lepers. Other organizations have sprung up, as inspiration from that particular Gurdwara or township that was set up. So the seva aspect of Sikhi has expanded from that first time when Guru Nanak did this profitable bargain of serving the hungry and the poor to pretty much every aspect of life. So that's all from me, and I'm going to leave the rest to the Q&A. I do want to say that I have recently, in fact, this morning, the Sikh Gurdwara in San Jose launched my new book. It's called Home of the Beloved. And I have a page dedicated to what is seva in Sikhi. And if I do have 2 or 3 minutes, I'd like to read that. And if not, that's okay. So whoever is keeping the time, if I have another couple of minutes, if I get permission to read that, I would like to. And like
Yes,
I said,
please take the time you need to read it, please.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So I'm going to start with one quotation from Sri Guru Granth Sahib, which says, "Which dunya save kamaye, tan darge baisan paye." It's only when you serve while you are in the midst of this world that you get a seat of honor in the kingdom of the divine. It's as basic as that. In order to find a place in the court of the divine, you have to serve. So I'll go on to my explanation of seva. Seva is service without the trumpet of ego. It is a gift that seeks neither reward nor acknowledgement. True seva is performed with selflessness. It's not easy to serve without ego and expectation of recognition or reward. With even a minuscule expectation, seva becomes a commercial transaction. When all acts of seva are committed to the divine, it becomes worship. Seva elevates the one who gives without obligating the one who receives. Who does one serve? Gurbani. Gurbani refers to the sayings of the scripture. Gurbani urges us to serve the divine. Serve those who are engaged in the service of the divine. Serve with loving devotion. Serve the hungry and the deprived. Serve the weak, the old, and the sick. Serve because the needy strike a chord in you and you experience their need as your own. Serve with integrity. Serve the environment, the air, the water, the great Mother Earth. The environment was very important to Guru Nanak, very, very important. And he said, he referred to the planet as the great Mother Earth who gives and gives. Serve the great Mother Earth, serve to uplift, serve to beautify, and serve to transform. Serve the inner silence. Silence is so important. And it's only when we connect within that we can connect without. Serve the inner music and the inner voice. Do not serve your greed or your base appetites, or the greed and base appetites of others. Do not serve grudges or remorse. Do not serve attachment or anger. Do not serve that which bloats your ego or the egos of others. Do not serve under pressure or in fear. Do not serve to flatter or to fawn. Serve because you are one with all. So that's service. Satgur ki seva kakari, sir dije aap gawai. It's not easy to serve. It's very difficult to serve really selflessly. It is when we surrender our head and give up our ego and selfishness that we become capable of serving. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessie G. That was such a fitting closure to the discussion that we've had in the past hour. Wonderful readings, and I look forward to reading and studying your book.
Thank you.
I want to thank each of the panel members for taking the time to talking to us and sharing their wisdom and the richness of their experience with us. There's so much here to digest that it'll take, at least for me, some time to go back and review and reflect and reread and re-listen to the recording and so on. But I wanted to spend about a couple of minutes kind of feeding back some of the things that I heard from what each one of you said. It's just going to be something that I picked from here and there in what you talked about, but and by no means represents the totality of your presentation. But I just wanted to give you those back, feed those back to you as things that struck me when you were talking. And then I have one question to ask the panel, and then I will then open this up to the group for Q&A and for discussion. Of course, this should come as no surprise to any of us. The first thing that struck me was that there's so much commonality across all religions and all faiths and all customs, creeds, and traditions on the central role that community service plays, both in our daily lives as well as in our religious experiences. But it's good to hear that being reinforced by scholars of each of the faiths. The second thing that struck me was the common theme of social justice that's encompassed and that bridged all of the discussions. And we think of social justice in different ways. The term means different things these days in our political and social context. But the concept of social justice, of equality, of opportunity for people is sort of fundamental to if we as a society we want to do well and live together and care for each other, equality and social justice becomes a necessity, right? And I think what we're doing in terms of what we call community service is in some way to provide that to provide that equality, that opportunity, that social justice. And I think three, if not all four of you mentioned the term specifically, and so that struck me when I heard when you talk. Reverend Peter, to me, what you said about community service as being the center of religious service, and how you showed by example that in the service you gave today, community service was sort of embedded and integral to the entire service today. That is very interesting. The sharing bread is symbolic of that equality, that social justice. Love your neighbor as you love yourself, right? The stole, your dish towel as a symbol of service, right? The one that you use to wash the feet of the less fortunate. All of those things struck me. I was intrigued by your description of yourself as a liberal pastor. I was thinking of what a conservative pastor by the same equation might be, and how what differences and similarities that you might have. And I was also quite intrigued and interested in your reaching out to the practice of Zen Buddhism, to get away from what you call the running around that you found in Christianity. I thought that was interesting to me. The brainstorming of headlines is an excellent thought that I thought we should give some more talk to. Professor Farid, you brought social justice to the fore right away in what you talked about. And a couple of things that struck me was the fact that you have a commonality of religion, at least in this country, Islam being the common religion, but with a huge breadth and depth of cultural and social diversity, which makes Islam a very complex sort of a religious system to work under. I was struck by the fact that you said that underrepresentation and need draw organization. You have a need, a calling that brings people to self-organize, and then that goes on to develop service models. And perhaps there's something there to be learned for us at the Institute as we go out and figure out how can we organize our community models better. Rabbi Hugh, you said that the foundational part of Judaism is worship and learning and acts of loving kindness. And that again, I see commonality between what you said there for Judaism, from what we've talked about in Hinduism, and what the Reverend talked about in Christianity, and definitely what Jesse G's just concluded in talking about services being central. You painted a picture for us in terms of institutional organization through the center, through the community centers and groups, through the agencies, and then finally through the synagogues and temples. And how each of those institutions might play a different role, but they all collaborate in terms of developing, of providing good community service. I think there's something to be learned from that model, right? The caring committees that you talked about when you teach your students, I think that's that's an excellent concept for us to take away and think about. And you also then brought about education for social justice, and that leading to charitable giving. And charitable giving, in a sense, in my mind, is not just giving money or giving material objects, but giving of self and giving of time. That's also charitable giving, right? And Jesse G, your redefinition of profit, Sacha Sauda, redefining value for the whole as a way of life, as service to the community, service to others, how it got institutionalized in Langar, the beautiful story you gave of Gurudwara and a mosque coexisting so that the community could come together to bridge religious differences. And then finally, what you said about let us start with the young. I think if we can start with the young, and then the young maintain that, and then they train their young, going forward, this is a valuable thing for us to know and think about. So those are some of the takeaways I had. I just, like I said, it's just a representative a little bit here and there. So I will pause there and I'll ask one question, and then I promise to put my mic on mute except to moderate and let other people talk. The question I have is this, that when we look, when I as a person seek assistance from somebody, it can be both in what I would call good times and good causes in a celebration type environment, or it could be in troubled times. And particularly in the latter, when I'm in trouble, right? I look to someone grounded in faith, usually in my faith, but not necessarily in my faith, but someone grounded in my faith as a trusted resource who can help me serve, help me with their service, help me in my need, right? So as we, the HCI, as we graduates to be of the CHT program, as we, the people who are going to be community service volunteers and under Ananda Core, go out and say, okay, community, here we are here to help you. How do we bring and inspire that element of trust that they will want to come to us and say, okay, you are the people. And in my mind, I've been thinking about this for a while. This is one of the biggest hurdles I think we are going to have to overcome in order to be effective in community service. It probably will build by word of mouth, but to get started, we need to have maybe some other magic ingredient. So I just throw the question out there: how do we, as providers of service, build trust in ourselves in the community? So with that, I will let anybody in the panel start with an answer to that. Maybe you'd like to respond to some of my comments. If you'd like to, please do that. But
I have a question, sir.
yes.
Trust in ourselves or trust in the person who is providing service during our troubled times?
Trust in the person who's providing the service.
Okay. Okay.
So if you were to come to me to say, you seek my help, you would not do that unless you had some kind of a trust in me to do that. I guess you're on mute, Jesse G.
I'd like to share a story from Sikh history, and I think it's about troubled times, as you said, And it's about not seeing the difference between you and the other that is at the basis of the service. So there was the stories from the times when there was a really bad war going on. Just like Emperor Akbar was a very empathetic and religiously tolerant individual, the last Mughal king, Aurangzeb, was not that. So there was the civil rights of the Indian people were being taken, forcible conversions were happening, etc., etc. The last Sikh Guru, Guru Gobind Singh, provided resistance, but his army was very small and made up of ordinary people. So what happened during one of the battles was there were soldiers that were wounded on both sides, and there was this water bearer, his name was Kanhaiya. He was seen giving water to the wounded of the enemy. Troubled times, right? The enemy is as much wounded as our own side. And he's giving water to the wounded of the enemy, which is more powerful and more equipped to fight than the side that was resisting the tyranny. So the Sikhs dragged him, this gentleman, to the Guru's court and said, he's a traitor. Look at him. He is trying to revive the fallen of the enemy when we are so small in number and so overpowered. So the Guru asked him, Kanhaiya, what made you do that? And Kanhaiya said, you have taught me to see you or the divine in all. I don't see a difference. So I serve everyone as one. And it doesn't matter to me that he's the enemy. He needs water, he's wounded. So Guru Gobind Singh gave him an ointment and said, you are the only one that has truly, amongst all these people who have dragged you, understood the meaning of true compassion. Compassion does not distinguish or discriminate between one or another of a different creed or a different faith, or even an enemy. Nako bari nai begana. So he says that here is an ointment, just as you give water, rub the ointment on the wounds of whoever you see needs help. And from now onwards, you will be immortalized as Bhai Kanhaiya, brother to all. Now, if we can truly bring in our lives this feeling of oneness, of one humanity, truly in our everyday living, and we do it by showing it through our actions, I think we'll create an environment of trust in which it'll be easy to help and easy to receive help. But when we live in divisive times and polarized political camps, it's very difficult to trust. I mean, wow, it's difficult to sometimes even express your opinions because you don't want to hurt someone. So I think to bring back that sense of oneness is very, very important, of unity, of us being above all humankind and having that humanity within us. If we could do that, it'll be easy to serve and easy to seek help.
Thank you, Jessie. That's very wise guidance to us. Any of the other panelists, would you like to have any general comments or responses?
Thanks, Dr. Mukund. I'll speak up and say, from a Jewish perspective, this notion of how to build trust on the part of those seeking help, right? So I would say that there's a sort of alternative creation myth that's embedded in Kabbalah, in a kind of mystical Judaism, that when the divine creates the world, God begins with a tzimtzum, an act of contraction. So in order to create something that is not God, God has to contract within God's self to make room for an other, for diversity, for the rest of the world. And so in imitating the divine, there's this notion that one of the things that we have to learn to do is to contract, to take up a little bit less space, to be a little bit less vocal, a little bit less present. And so when we visit a Shiva house, when we visit a house of mourning, it's traditional to enter the house and say as little as possible. so that the mourner can tell their stories, can say what they need to say. And it's not our place to make them feel better, to take care of them, but just to provide a presence, a listening, active presence. And so this notion of taking up less space as we are serving the other, I think is really critical and takes practice, right? We want to go in, we want to help, we want to save, we want to serve, and really the trick is to be present, but not projecting our agenda, and instead listening to the other, hearing really what their needs are.
Thank you, Rabbi. And just a note to the scholars, you will tie in what Rabbi Hugh just told us to the discussion we had a couple of weeks ago on being a compassionate presence, and how it is the art of being a compassionate presence is actually developing the art of silence, the art of being able to listen, which is difficult for all of us. The previous discussions we had, very good. Thank you, Rabbi.
You know, that was such a great question, and I really appreciate it, and the responses I just really echo. And I'd say in my particular context, you know, speaking as a Christian, but also as a white male, that this is a critical question that that has to be asked by Christians and by white men, because I say we haven't done very well with this question often, because and I think about that, you know, about how are we met, and if somebody meets us as, oh, you're a person who needs pity, or you need something that I alone can bring, or you need help. I mean, there's a part of us that, you know, recoil from that. But, you know, it goes exactly back. I just love this language about seeing, and about seeing oneness. And when I am met by somebody who, and it's always my challenge to meet the other, as in Christian language, you might say, do I see Christ in you? Or do I see the holy in you? Do I see the divine in you? Do I see God in you? And in that, am I open to the discovery in this relationship that, in fact, the Christ always comes in the stranger's guise. Christ always comes in the way we didn't expect, maybe didn't even want, in the quote other. So, is there an openness to curiosity, to discovery, and that deep engagement that you have as much to gift and transform me as much as I have anything to give and to offer you. So it's a real, what could I say? I think it's a real place of learning for Christians in our community service. And more specifically, you know, as I said, for white men in our approach to community service about this very question and about that oneness.
Yes, thank you. I guess it's a continuous process of learning and reflecting, and then trying to improve the way we behave and the way we act and what we do. Yes. I'd like to invite everybody to turn on their videos and participate. I'd like to throw the floor open to any questions or comments. We still have plenty of time, another 15-20 minutes at least, Ashishji, something like that.
Yes, we do. Absolutely.
So let us take advantage of having this rich resource with us, and let us learn from them as much as we can. Would anyone like to lead off and offer any thoughts or questions or comments from what we've heard so far today?
Mukunji, I'll start with a question.
Yes, please, Rukmini ji.
So so the question I had was, all the religious leaders spoke about the fundamental meaning of their religion or the faith. And, like you said, there is so much commonality, and everything seemed, came out with togetherness, sense of community, yet we see so much division in people. So if the religion really means and teaches these kind of values, why is the need for feeling one better than the other? Why is my God better than your God, or higher or superior? So I'm just trying to understand from these religious leaders, like, these gods who created these religions are children or messengers or avatars of gods. They're not like God is like, maybe higher, right? So why is there need to prove that my God is better, or like, why bring divisiveness and ego?
Who would like to take a crack at that one?
That is such the great question. Somebody reminded me the other day, they were said, there is good news and there's better news. The good news is that you have a Messiah. The better news is that it's not you. And I would say in this that, I'd say for Christians, specifically in my context, absolutely, we've seen the fruits of a Messiah complex that, oh, no, you could be doing other good things. But finally, we have, this thing that you need. And it's that kind of energy that is the real opportunity for transformation in that. And so absolutely. And I would go right back to what's been so echoed here is it's such an issue around ego and the meaning of that.
And I would fully echo that, Nitiji. We understand in concept the religion and the oneness, and every God is in everybody and everybody's equal and so on. But then in practice, our egos and our need to be correct and our need to be bigger or better to build our self-esteem, whatever it is, gets in the way, and we forget our teachings.
Thank you.
It is said that ego has many layers and levels. There is no ego bigger than the spiritual ego. And there is no fall harder than the fall from that level of ego. So we've not understood the message when we're trying to be superior to anyone of any faith or within our own faith, that my practice is better than yours. We haven't gotten the message then.
Anyone else with a question to ask or a comment?
Mukundji, may I
Yes.
ask? First of all, I would like to thank the panelists and yourself for a very beautiful summation of the concept which was stated in Rig Veda. It said, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vatanti. The truth is only one. And different people, it comes in different forms and different learned people call it different names, but it doesn't make that one any different. And all four of the panelists said that in such beautiful words. And another thing, I think that came across was the commonality, which is really what it is. And one other most important thing, for us to have a small presence to understand the divine in the other person is the concept of humility, that I may know a lot less, and I think every one of them said that I may know a lot less. I am willing to learn and the open mind, and that was a very wonderful session. I really thank all of you for the time you've taken. I have a question, and if it is inappropriate for this context, please let me know. Pastor Peter, I think his name is, forgive me if I didn't get the name right, said you're a liberal pastor. And this as part of social justice, where does everybody stand on, say, birth control and abortion rights for women and health care for women? I mean, that's I think it's an important part of everything. And I mean, if it's not the right question for this forum, I'm willing to, maybe ask them in person. I mean, I'm asking in terms of understanding the concepts from other religions, not as a way to, as a judgmental way.
Right. So it's a wonderful question. And I think it adds to a real particularity about the question that came up about if in this Zoom square, you instead have an evangelical Christian, or you had a conservative Catholic priest, what would they have said different? I talked about some of the ways we all would have talked about something about community service. But when we come down to issues around sexuality or around the body, there we would have, you would hear some differences around our sense about community service and what that meant. And you would hear some distinct differences around birth control, for example, around abortion or choice, women's right to choose. You would hear differences around human sexuality, about not only tolerance, but about acceptance of people who are LGBTQ. You would hear that diversity. And that goes back to some particularities in each of our traditions and our centering of what is most important. And I would say in my tradition, the pieces that would be really central for that would be going back to, I'd say again, this work about justice, the work about inclusion for all. There is kind of expression in the United Church of Christ that says, whoever you are, and wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. So that's a powerful statement about a community of a big welcome table. You'd have other communities that would be more, I would use the word more proscriptive about what that means, about how you need to behave, how you need to make choices in that way that would fit a much narrower confined box. The challenge in that is sometimes it can just get to be about the box and you forget about the why. In my tradition, it can get to be this very broad inclusion, and then you can get to go, but why are we being so inclusive? And again, it goes back to our understandings, and finally, our meeting with our understanding of everything that we might call God or the holy or mystery or wonder.
Thank you, Reverend Peter. More other questions on community service, on what you heard today? We still have, I think,
wants to say
a few
something.
minutes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Can I ask?
Yes, please, Narayan.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Narayan. Thank you very much for a very nice session. And I mean, all the panelists made some really, common core impact in my, thinking. But I was looking at the community service as a whole, and what are the advantages or constraints of basing community services based on religious teachings, practices, or places of worship? Does it really narrow the definition of community that we want to serve? And how do you approach that particular problem when you kind of everything starts from the religious practices, teaching, and places of worship, and then expands into the community. So how do you expand the definition of community? Otherwise, it becomes very narrow definition of your own, community. And what is the best approach that somebody can take for that, right? And if there's a common issues, cross-pollination is feasible. But social, cultural, and ritualistic issues, it becomes suddenly narrow. So how do you build a system that will address all three at the same time compartmentalized?
Any thoughts from our panel?
Maybe I'll say a word or two, just to say that this tension between particularism and universalism, I think just to notice that there's a tension there, and that maybe a spectrum of engagement, I think is very important, right? So I was thinking about the distinction between small L liberal and small c conservative Jewish communities, which is to say, I would make a distinction between liberal communities and Orthodox communities in our own tradition. And one of the ways in which that spectrum will play out is that the more Orthodox, the more conservative communities will focus more on the particular needs of their communities. So community service will take place in the confines of a community that has defined itself in many ways in opposition to modernity, right? They have made a choice to remain distinct and to be less acculturated. That is less the case in more liberal communities, and I would also define myself as a liberal rabbi, which is to say that my organization supports egalitarianism between sexes and tries to take advantages of the benefits of modernity, right? And so as part of that, we are more engaged in service to a kind of universal to all people, as opposed to just serving within the Jewish community. But there's a spectrum there, right? So we are also dedicated to strengthening the Jewish people. And so there's a kind of ongoing prioritization, an ongoing balancing of the universal and the particular. But just to notice that distinction, I think, is the first stage in the journey, right?
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ella.
If I could just add, I think sort of echoing some of the things that have been said, within the Islamic tradition and Muslims generally, whether one looks at it as Muslims here in the United States or Muslims elsewhere, you're seeing the same kind of diversity, tremendous diversity, as was pointed out, that in some ways, this community is diverse in a way that many other faith traditions are not. And so that diversity then plays out not only in terms of religious interpretation of how the religion should be interpreted in the public sphere, where you have for instance, conservative Muslims with very literal interpretations, which would be similar in some ways. There would be parallels. And I'm surprised, in fact, that the more I've come to know about the Jewish tradition, I've come to see some of the parallels within with the more conservative segments of Muslims and, for instance, Orthodox Judaism. And there are so many things that sort of are similar between these two traditions. And then, of course, you look at the much more liberal and progressive side of Muslims, which are quite similar to the most progressive liberal side of Christianity, including sort of, for instance, the Catholic notions of social justice and community service are very similar there. And so when it comes to the Muslim community, it's interesting that we're often defined as being politically liberal, similar to Jews, for instance, and yet socially conservative, like some of the most conservative Christians. And so on issues of abortion, for instance, or same-sex marriage, Muslims, many of them will be in line with evangelical Christians, for instance, but yet on issues about political liberalism and sort of the role of government, they will be far more progressive, which is quite unique in that sense. So you have a socially liberal strand within Islam and Muslims, and a very conservative strand socially that plays out. And so that diversity emanates from the tradition and the way that is interpreted and then plays out in the public arena. It's interesting that the recent polls that I've been involved with also suggest that there is, in fact, a generational difference. If you look at, for instance, those that are above 50 have far more conservative views on many of these social issues, whether it's same-sex marriage or abortion and elsewhere, while the same, families, the younger generation, those that are under 30, for instance, have far more liberal and progressive views. And so on those same topics, then there's this generational divide that takes place within families. And so the kids will come back from college and start arguing with their parents about same-sex marriage and abortion rights, for instance, and being involved, or Black Lives Matter, for instance, this debate that's going on of current issues, even on where they vote, for instance. You had older generations that remain very staunchly Republican and will support conservative candidates, while you have others that will continue to emphasize the Democratic Party. And so this diversity plays out in so many different ways. And with the Muslim community, it's clearly showing that there is no unified. And the more that I've been studying it and trying to bring the community together, I've been in some ways frustrated with the fact, but yet reassured that this is probably a good thing, that, this community is tremendously diverse, and that, in fact, that diversity is what's beautiful about it, because people interpret their faith in so many different ways and play out that faith in the social institutions that they get involved in, and the types of community service that they engage in also is a reflection of that diversity.
Thank you so much, Professor Fareed.
Yeah,
it's interesting that even in our disparities, there's commonality across religions and cultures and traditions. So
absolutely.
I hate to do this, but we are well over our 2-hour mark. And if Kailash, you would like to make a couple of last-minute remarks, I'll just give you time. But I do want at this time to really thank the panel for the deep interest and the effort they've taken in participating with us today, and giving us so much food for thought and so many learnings that I think we're richer for it today, and we'll benefit from this a lot. So, Kailash, floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I must say I'm also truly gratified with our panelists and their participation and very hearted sharing of their inner thoughts, their proud histories, and we really learned something and so on. But I wish I had a fifth panelist, Mukunji, somebody from the Hindu tradition, so we could bring thought. Let me just give one perspective. So we are not a theological. We are an education and service institution, and none of us has the whole concept of collar doesn't exist in the Hindu tradition. We don't have priests who are trained. We have a different kind of a religious foundation and so on. But the two things that really stand out, I think, in the challenge that we have in articulating community service in the diaspora in the way we want to, is that, number one, the rooting of the service in all the four traditions that we heard about today are so intertwined in the religious belief system. They are such an integral part of that, which is what the Hindu tradition does not have. I'm not saying there's nothing good or bad, it's basically the fact. The second one, I think, is the whole concept of congregation and preaching. There's a second distinction between the Hindu tradition and the other four traditions. We do not have a place where we all get together and with a common purpose. And that's where the other traditions do. And generally speaking, they gather at a temple church or a gurdwara or a mosque, wherever they do, and they're able to share and reflect on their common interests and the common obligations to the community and society as a whole. And so I think those are the two elements that at FCI we're trying to see. How do we make up for those in the modest way that we are building this institution for the diaspora?
Kailash, I just have one small comment to add. You said that Hinduism lacks that. Whatever you said, yes, it does, but it's only here in the Western world. This was very much there if you go back to our ancient texts, if you go back to India, it was there. We lost it because of whatever happened, all that 1,000 years of rule and everything, right? That is what caused this. So please, if you could just add that correction there, I would really be thankful to you.
Okay, no, who was this, please? I didn't get the name.
Uttara?
Oh, okay. No, thank you. No, I understand the ancient origins and the ancient traditions. I'm talking about the modern centuries of current diaspora. Our focus at CI basically is in India, for example, the social structure and the joint family structure makes up for much of this community service elements and so on. At least it did until recent times in most populations. But I'm talking about the challenge that we as a diaspora institution have, and how do we create the analogs for those two or three elements. And so that's just more of a thought and a challenge for us. And but I did want to say
thank you. No, thank you, Kailash. The reason I wanted you to say that was because the others they don't have the understanding of that part of India, right? So that is our Hinduism, right? That is why I wanted you to emphasize that. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off like that, but I just wanted you to add that so that everybody else, the rest of the religious leaders will also understand, get a complete picture of our religion too.
Thank you, Uttaraji.
Yeah, I think thank you for adding that element of history, and we appreciate that so much. Again, thanks. So yeah, Mukunji, I think that's just the one or two points I want to mention. And you do have some more time. I think we have till 3:30.
I think we're actually about 10 minutes over.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's okay. This was 10 minutes very well spent, and
yes.
I'm sure the scholars